So, Sarah, um, as someone who's worked both sides of the fence, both local authority and as a provider, what's the one thing you'd want someone who's entering social care for the first time as someone who's accessing a service? What's the one thing you'd want them to know?
Uh, Thank you. So I think it's really important to remember that the majority of social care services, the vast majority of care services, are good or better than good. So there's a lot of negative stories about social care, and the media loves negative stories, and you only ever hear about it really when something's gone wrong. But actually, the vast majority of services are rated good or outstanding by the regulator, by CQC, and the vast majority of experiences that people have are good. Obviously, it's not perfect, and there might be niggles, but feel confident that you will get a good service.
Okay. Is that, do you think there is a fear about social care then?
Um, there is a fear about social care for a number of reasons. Some of it is just really you don't want to lose control. And quite often, when you get to need social care, it's because perhaps something's going wrong, you've become ill, and you start to feel, you're losing control of your life. And so that's naturally an anxiety provoking time, and you're going to feel scared. But also, as I said, both negative stories in the media and our experience during COVID didn't help at all. So, for those of us working in care homes during COVID and for people living in care homes and their relatives, many people didn't have a good experience because care homes were initially forced to close their doors. And that is a hangover now in terms of people worrying that they'll go into a care home and they won't be able to basically get out again, which is not true, but it will make people worried.
So there's we're recording this in April 26th. There was a case reported on the BBC of a 33-year-old lady with a long list of conditions who was trying to get back home, and the NHS discharged her into a hospital, into a care home. And it was absolutely fascinating reading that article and thinking, well, I get the NHS argument, and I get actually from a sort of a sector-wide social care position of actually, you know what, it's probably not appropriate for you to be at home right now because you can't get a package of care. But the emotive words she was using around feeling locked away in the care home, feeling restricted, that she couldn't live her life. This is my lived experience with social care is with elder people, 65, dementia. This lady was 33 and had capacity, but you're absolutely right that there is this fear of loss of control that I don't recognize in social care, but it's something that I think that individuals receiving the care, but also the family members will experience as well. I suddenly have no control over what goes on with mum or dad on a day-to-day basis.
So the reality is that care homes come in lots of different shapes and sizes. And there's also services called supported living where people have their own tenancy, but it's group living and care comes in, or people can live at home and receive care. They can have a direct payment from the local authority and buy their own care, or they might be paying for their own care themselves. And there's also, just to confuse matters further, there's retirement living, some of which has care there available on site, and some of which just has some communal facilities. So there are care does come in different shapes and sizes, and what might be right for one person isn't necessarily right for another. And you can have really good care in a care home with lots of freedom, for want of a better word, lots of choice and lots of involvement. Or you could be in your own home and effectively unable to go out, waiting for a visit from a carer, feeling more imprisoned and less enabled than if you were in a care home. It very much depends on the person and what's right for them and what sort of services are being provided. To hear that somebody who's 33 is living in a care home doesn't sound right to me. The first place that people should always live should be in their own home. However, it doesn't mean that they can't have a great experience in a care home. Some people want the company, and
Mhm.
I've seen people really thrive. They could have carried on living at home, but they were so lonely. They weren't looking after themselves, they weren't eating properly. And they went into a care home. They absolutely thrived. They started eat. This is an older person. She was eating better. She was walking again. Social worker would go around and go, why is this person in a care home? Like, she shouldn't be here. But actually, if she'd gone home again, she would have been miserable. She would have self-neglected,
Mm.
and she wouldn't have had a good experience. So I can't stress enough, really. You've got lots of different kinds of people, lots of different kinds of services.
Do you think that fragmentation of the sector, the fact that there are so many different types of social care offering, actually hinders us? Because everything you said sounds absolutely perfect. That we've got this personalised social care system, and everyone can take what they want. But it's like I can imagine an individual going, okay, how do I care for mum or dad, or even you're 18 years old, you're a care leaver, or you've got a child who's moving through the care system. There's too much choice. How do you know where to start?
Yeah, so I think for individual people, it's confusing, and that doesn't help. However, I do actually support the way that social care is currently organised, because there is an underpinning principle around choice. It's in the legislation about choice. There's actually legislation just dedicated to choice, which is the Direct Payments Act, as I said earlier, about people receiving money to pay for their own care if they don't have their own. For the individual person and their family, it's not good to be confused about what's available. And what we need is much, much better information and much, much better guidance and brokerage and hand holding, or whatever you want to call it, to help somebody find the services that are right for them, or indeed change if they try something, they don't like it, and they think, I want a different care home, or I've tried care at home, it's not working for me. So we should be able to change our minds as well. However, the overall shape of social care, I think, is good, because the alternative is there's a real risk that we end up with institutionalized care again, that's only run by one or two types of organisation or authorities. You end up with a one size fits all. And I'm old enough to have worked in local authority care homes when they used to run their own care homes, both older people's care homes and those for younger people with learning disabilities. And, there's good care, there's bad care, but they weren't that great. They weren't that great. And the diversity that we have now actually, I think, leads for more innovation, more choice, more variety. There's a talk of a national care service. We need to proceed with extreme caution, in my opinion. We think of the NHS, don't we, as being one organisation, but actually there's all sorts of, different types of hospital and different types of services and different types of doctors, and they don't always speak to each other. And it's like, so there is no perfect solution, but what we do need is more information for the people that are looking for care.
So it's really interesting that you're talking about a move, loads of different strands here. Let's just go down on one, on the National Care Service. So earlier in the year, we had Barchester bought out, which was a Welltower bought them out, £5.6 billion transaction. The Competition Markets Authority are now investigating that. It does put a very significant amount of older person, particularly care home real estate, in the hands of one investor, being Welltower. It sounds like you would be very concerned about the increased consolidation of the sector behind one or two investors, or the growth of larger groups. Is that a fair assumption?
I think we need to separate out ownership with who's actually running it. So without wanting to get into the complications of governance and group structures, you can still have an investor, but still have different types of homes with different types of sort of brand and ethos and culture. Just as we now have many different types of care homes, you can have different care home companies, and they might be directed at different things. Even Welltower, and I'm not an well, I can talk about private money in social care. This goes back to the adversarial relationship between local authorities and providers, which is quite interesting. But anyway,
We will come on to that. Don't worry, it's
I
fine.
will come on to that. Yeah, I'll put that to one side for a minute. If you look at the whole sector, let's call it a market because that's the word that's used. If you look at the market for just for care homes, there are 11,000 care homes for people aged over 65. 11,000. Of those 11,000 care homes, 75% of them are owned by one person who owns one, two, or three care homes. If you get up to between 5 and 10 care homes, you're in a quite a big group actually, because there aren't that many organisations where there are 8 to 10 homes. So the absolute vast majority are owned by one person, often family run. So they're going to have their own ethos and way of doing things. Doesn't matter what Welltar are doing, it's like nothing to do with them. They're going to have their own ethos. So when you're talking about wealth, so then you're left with the remaining 25%. You've got a tiny proportion that are owned by local authorities still, really tiny. And then of the big corporations, about another 5% or so, maybe 8%, are owned by not-for-profit charities, many of which have got a long heritage. So they might have started years and years ago, looking after veterans after the war, or a certain type of religious group or whatever. Other ones were started when the local authorities externalised their care homes and they look for not-for-profit providers. Sometimes they set them up specifically to run the care homes that used to be owned by the local authorities. And then you've got this tiny percentage, by the time you've done all of that, 15% owned by the big corporates, with somebody like Welltower sitting behind them. So I'm not yet worried that all the care homes are going to be the same, because they're not. And that it would be a very long time before. I mean, you could look at it the other way around and say, I don't know, if you were a McDonald's or something, you want all your chips to taste the same in every McDonald's outlet, or you're running some kind of franchise, you struggle to control the branding and the experience to make it uniform. That would be that I wouldn't like to have that problem in social care, because there's so much variety.
I completely agree, and I think I can't imagine how you would achieve the same lived experience in you know six or we run 6 care homes, 3 nursing, 3 residential. We deliberately don't have the same experience because we know that to force it would be almost impossible. And actually, you go back to your point about choice. Everyone is going to choose a different care home for different reasons, and that lived experience is one of them. It's got to be unique to you. Um, I think what you're saying is that although there is a risk that we would have consolidation in the sector, a very cynical finance director such as myself would suggest that actually that is coming downstream, and that actually that 15% may very well grow to 20-25% in the next 5 years. It's not a huge risk for the purposes of where we are right now.
And also there are advantages. I mean, there is an argument, isn't there, between like the small homely home that's only got like 20 or 30 bedrooms and the big corporate home that looks like a hotel and has got 80 or 90 bedrooms. And I once made the mistake of saying something on LinkedIn where I've got quite a presence, saying something about the small homes. I can't believe I said the small homes need to close. I didn't mean that. I was jumped on. That's not actually what I said. I was jumped on by about half the small care home sector. What I said was some of the older buildings are not fit for purpose, and it's actually very difficult to provide good care in an older building. Thinking about health and safety and space to move around, modern equipment that people need. Some homes still have shared rooms, don't have en suite. So it was as much about the physical environment and also the economics. It's possible, but it's more challenging with a smaller home to get the right level of clinical and staffing team cover. However, the big homes are characterized by being large, impersonal, like a hotel. The care's not very good. That's not true either. Many of the larger homes are amazing and the care's really good, and they strive also to create a homely environment, sometimes by having what we call the household model. So you might have 16 rooms or 8 rooms arranged around a living area and its own kitchen with its own care team dedicated to that household. I went to a home recently on the edge of Swindon, and they had individual bedrooms where you could control the temperature in your own room.
Mm.
You had a fridge to put your wine or your chocolate or your meds, and some of the rooms had your own bath in the ensuite. I mean, I have 2 baths a day, and my nightmare is I go into a care home and I can't bath anymore.
Mm.
I don't care what the cost is. I'm having a room with a bath in. So it's not black and white. There are small homes that are really good and rated outstanding and very loving and caring, and there are small homes that are crumbling and not fit for purpose. And there are big homes that are luxurious and maybe feel a bit impersonal, but there are also big homes that are providing really good
Yeah.
care with really good people.
Okay. It comes back to that word choice, doesn't it? You will choose. We choose where we want to live, and that's what a care home is. That's what this whole process is. It's how do you want to live, and where do you want to live, and what do you want that experience to look and feel like. Um,
You choose what's right for you, and there are other things to think about when you're choosing a care home, like where are your friends? Where are your relatives? What is your community? Will people be able to visit you? Have they, I mean, they would do these days, but have they got an open visitor policy? Can I get to the shops? Can I get out into the garden? Are there regular trips out? Or if perhaps I no longer able to move around so much and I spend more time in my room, can I in my room sometimes?
mm,
What's the menu like? So will I be able to have a bath is important for me.
mm,
So those very personal things. It's not just about the size of the home and the cost is. My great uncle went into a care home. He was 100, bless him. By the time he actually did go into a care home, he went into a care home that was rated requires improvement. And we said to him, "Are you sure about this? Because look, the care quality commission have said the care's not."
mm.
And he said, "No, I want to be in this care home because all my friends are in this locality." And he didn't use that word. He said, "All my friends are here, and I want them to be able to visit me." And that was his main number one consideration: is could his friends visit? And sure enough, the care home came out of requires improvement at the next inspection anyway, because they'd been working really hard to fix the issues that they had. So the reasons why you choose a home, and if you're lucky enough to be able to pay for your own place, then yeah, they're very personal to you.
And that comes on to the whole local authority piece, which really keen to dig into with you. So I think if you are able to pay an ever increasing sum, and fees, we're in February of 26. The fees are starting to, fee letters are going out this week. We have national living wage increases coming up. So if you are able to pay privately, you have the freedom of choice. There are individuals who are obviously um, going to be paid for by the local authority. Do you, in my experience as a provider of care, we feel that actually that limits your choice because the local authority has its own agendas often. I know that the legislation isn't intended for that, but could you just explain to the audience, people who are just entering care, right? Your local authority funded, your assets below £23,500. What does that mean for you in terms of choice?
So just to take a step back, if I may, and
Mm.
just talk about how the system works, if that's all right. So if you need care or you think you might need care, and it's quite a loose definition in legislation, so it's all governed by legislation. Local authorities can't just do whatever they like. It's all operated by legislation that actually started way back in the 1940s, at the same time that the NHS was set up. That's when local authorities were given responsibility for looking after people in need in their area, and they could have been in need for reasons of age, disability, but it's quite a loose definition. And then we had other bits of legislation like the Care Act came in, again, which gave local authorities really the the job of doing assessments and assessing if you're entitled to social care. And so anybody can ask for an assessment, and the local authority will have a look at you and say, okay, you're driving a car, you're like, you're perfectly well, no, I don't think you're going to be entitled to social care. Or they might say, oh yeah, we can see that you're older, perhaps you've got early signs of dementia, or it's likely you're going to need social care, be entitled to it. So they will do an assessment. How long you have to wait for that assessment will depend on that initial screen in terms of your circumstances and how high priority you are to get attention from the local authority. And that's the sad reality, is that some people are waiting quite a long time for an assessment, even though their needs might be quite high, because they're living at home with their spouse or their daughter, and they're effectively safe. Once the local authority does an assessment, again, the criteria are quite strict, and they will say, yes, you're entitled to social care. They'll then do a second assessment, which is a financial one, to say, how much money have you got, and how much should you contribute towards the cost of your care. It's on the individual, not their family or their spouse or anything. So it is on the individual. And if you have got your own resources and finances, they will say you need to find your own care. We can give you some information. If your finances are below a certain level, then the local authority has by law to meet your needs. But the way they meet their needs is kind of up to them. Like, they have dialogue with you about you want, but there's no guarantee, even if you wanted to go into a care home, that they'd offer you a place in a care home. They might say, actually, we can meet your needs at home, in your own home, by sending carers in, arranging home care for you. So the way your needs are met then becomes dialogue. Mm-hmm. Assume then, is this making sense? Am I okay with this story?
Keep going. This is all really good.
Okay, good, cool. Okay, I was just checking that I was talking sense. Okay, so then, assuming then that you're entitled to social care, you don't have your own money, you can't pay for it, care at home is not a viable option for you, maybe your home is not adapted and you can't manage the stairs anymore, or whatever it is, they agree that you need to go into a care home and they will pay for it. You then should have choice about which care home you go into, but it will be within a limited amount. So the local authority will have sort of bandings against which they'll pay a certain amount of money for certain types of needs, a little bit of wiggle room. Some people can pay a bit more for a better room, or the relatives can pay a bit more. But basically, you should have some choice at that point in terms of which care home you go into, and they will find a home for you. And like I said at the beginning of the recording podcast, the chances are you'll be fine. It'll be good care. 82% of care homes are rated good or outstanding. It's going to be in your locality. If you want to go and live near to your daughter in a different county, that negotiation can happen, and they could arrange for care for you in a different local authority. It might take a bit longer, but all of these things are possible. Mm. What happens then, going back to the relationship between local authorities and care providers, is the local authority then sets up a contract for that care, and they pay the care home for your care. That contractual relationship, in my opinion, is at the root of what can be a slightly adversarial relationship. If you think of the two sides, for want of a better word, local authorities are trying to place as many people as possible into care homes for basically the best price they can possibly get, because they've got a limited amount of money that they can spend, and they want to help as many people as possible. So you're concerned with your care, but there are 99 other people in the queue who are also needing care. So as the local authority, I've got to think, I want the best care for you, the person in front of me, but if I spend all my money on you, the other 99 are waiting at home with nothing. So you have to spread the money out. So they want the best price. Mm-hmm. Care homes, on the other hand, are thinking, well, I'm here. I need to fill my rooms. I need customers, basically, to come and live with me. I've got to pay for my care team. I've got to pay for my food and my heat and light, and I'm probably still paying rent or the mortgage on the building in the first place. And so they want the best possible fee rate they can get for the people that come and live with them. Profit is a whole other story. At the moment, their main concern is sustainability. They want to be there tomorrow for their customers. So there is an inherent tension in that relationship. The care providers want the best price they can get, i.e. higher. The local authorities want the best price they can get, i.e. lower. And so that is going to create a tension. And that's before you get to any of the myths that are around, really negative myths that circle around this sector about the motivation of commissioners and providers.
Go on then, let's dive into those myths.
Well, I thought you might answer that.
Because as far as I'm concerned, all commissioners are absolutely awful and they just want to drive the price down. And I'm sure from the other side, they think the providers are rich fat cats driving around in Ferraris and Lamborghinis.
Yeah, which in some cases they are. Yeah, so the myths are, so we can exaggerate, can't we, to make the point, and the truth is somewhere in between. But the myth is that commissioners don't care. All they want is the cheapest price. They got an eBay purchasing system of like lots where they just don't care about the person, and they change all the time. There's no continuity, and they don't know anything about care. So, or at least they don't know anything about running a care home. So that is the negative myth about commissioners. That is not the truth. That is not the truth. And then the myth about, and I'd like to come back to something closer to the truth, the myth about care providers is they're only interested in money, they're only interested in profit. Some of them are making super profits. They'll have the lowest number of staff on duty that they can possibly get away with. And, you know, if something goes wrong, they blame whoever was on duty rather than looking at their own, you know, like own role in this. I mean, I'm sorry to be negative, and I'm a bit worried about saying this on a podcast like this because I don't want that to be the soundbite, because that's not what care is like. But these are the myths that are around, and a lot of it's about well, it's not even profit; it's about making money. So I've worked as a commissioner and I've worked as a provider, and I've been recently doing some work on commissioning children's services, and there is a discussion nationally now about whether profit in children's services should actually be not allowed at all, like just completely not allowed. And they tried that in Wales, actually. They made it effectively illegal to make a profit. And the commissioners in the children's services are really worried that a lot of the money that they use to buy care for children is just going on offshore profit centres, you know? And they have a sort of philosophical objection to people making money out of care, which is, you know, they've got, the local authority becomes the corporate parent. They don't want somebody making money out of their children. Now, the reality is there are some providers, let's stick with children's for a minute, that are making shed loads of money out of children's care. They can charge whatever they want, and they are charging eye-watering prices. However, it doesn't mean they don't care, they don't want to provide a good service. They're kind of doing it because they can, because the relationship between the commissioners and the providers is so broken. They don't really sit around a table and say, come on, guys, how can we make this better for children, for families, and for both sides, for want of a better word? Having been a provider, I know that you can make money in social care, but you're not going to make mega money. You really want the best outcomes for the people that you support. Because, like I said, you want to be here tomorrow. You're going to be here tomorrow because people are saying good things about you. Oh, you know, they're running a really good care home down the road. I want mum to go there when she needs care or whatever it is. They want sustainability, so they do need to make money. And you can make money. But I think the mega profits thing is a bit of a local authority myth. And then just to finish, because I don't think I said it, when I was a commissioner, I really, really cared about quality and people getting good care. And I really wanted to work with the providers in my area to help them strategically. You know, if there was some awful little provider that was providing bad care, I would want to help that home to close and to support the residents to go and live in one of the better care homes and have a stronger partnership with the better care homes so that they were providing good care and to make us very accessible to our partners so they knew where to contact us. We used to have commissioning days where we would talk about our strategy, listen to their issues, and then have one-to-one, so there's lots of things you can do to improve that relationship, and I'm sure lots of areas are doing that.
So just going back on going back to the contract, you're right, it creates a tension. Do you think that local authorities are aware of that that they are aware that it's adversarial, or do they feel that this is just the way it is and there's no other way for the sector to work?
It probably depends who you ask. I mean, I'm so old now. I was started working when, I can remember the 1990/93 Care Act coming in, and that was the original Community Care Act, which actually started what we called a market in social care, and the local authority care homes were externalised. But in reality, for many years, care homes had operated outside of the local authority with good, strong tradition of whether it was a doctor that had set up a nursing home or whether it was a charity or a church group running a home, so that they still existed before all of this stuff came in. I don't think we appreciated how adversarial it was going to make the sector at that time. Gradually over time, we all got used to it. I mean, what the mantra was choice. You need a private sector and you need a thriving third voluntary sector so that people have choice. It was all about choice, choice, choice. And then people used to say, oh, they just mean choice for commissioners, not choice for individuals. But actually, that, like we were just saying at the beginning, there is choice. I do think people realise it's adversarial. Whether they see it changing is another question, because if you talk to a local authority person, they might see a national care service as the way to change it and make everything uniform again, which we just were saying is not good for other reasons. And when there are policy discussions, a lot of the policy discussions at national level, they tend to involve local authority commissioners and think tanks and not enough providers. I mean, okay, we've got Care England and the National Care Forum and NCA, which I can never remember what it stands for. So we've got these other groups, but they're almost, I don't want to say they've gone native because Martin Green would shoot me, but they're almost too close actually to the conversation. And if we're going to change things, we really need to involve providers in how things might look, might be different actually, is my thoughts.
Yeah. But again, we've got such a fragmented sector that is, in terms of number of beds, 4 times the size of the NHS. Actually, interestingly, if you combine the NHS and the prison service, care homes are still twice the size of that. So it's so much bigger than you can ever possibly imagine but that creates a problem of getting around it. How do you get so many providers to feed into it?
Well, quite honestly, most providers won't be interested. They'll be like, "Thank you very much. I'm not quite happy doing what I'm doing over here. Thank you very much." And they'll be like, "I've heard so many. How many times have you been consulted? How many times have you been invited onto a consultative committee or a meeting or something? And did anything change as a result of it?" I'm sorry, I'm being cynical again, but a lot of care home operators, bearing in mind we said just for older people it's 11,000 care homes. They don't even know how the legislation works. They don't, within the sort of narrow confines of social services going to phone me up or the hospital phone me up and say, "Can I take this person?" All of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes in terms of the legislation is not really their issue. And they've heard about it all changing. So, their dad ran the care home or their mum and their granny before that. Thank you very much. My care home's full. People love me. I've got enough employees. You go away. And when reform is discussed, which we haven't really touched on, it's often talked about in the context of who pays and whether people pay for their own care or not.
Yeah.
And that's a completely different discussion about reform of the actual sector itself. And that's confused. There's confusion about whether people should pay for their own care or how long they should pay for their own care for, compared with actually changing what's on offer.
Which do you think is more important?
Oh, what's on offer? 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the reform, the Dilnot review and the proposals from Dilnot, I mean, to be fair, Dilnot's proposals were checked. He proposed a much lower cap on the care, and it was even the first time round, it was quite a bit higher, and then higher and higher and higher and higher. But even Dilnot himself, who I've had the privilege of meeting and spending time with, he even by his own calculation, the first iteration of his reform, only 22% of private payers would ever reach the cap. Now, so you're chucking in billions of pounds, and you're only helping 22% of people needing care. So, I wasn't wholly behind the reform for that reason. And also, it didn't mean new money into social care. You would replace private payers' money with statutory government taxpayer money, but the total amount of money stayed the same. So in terms of helping the sector to develop or improve or whatever, again, it wasn't going to make any difference. So, while I have some sympathy with people having to pay for their own care, I also think, as someone who does own my own, I'm lucky enough that I own my own house and everything, is that my generation have actually benefited a lot from house price inflation, from policies that favoured home ownership. I'm much more worried about young people, actually. And I don't see why my children should pay more tax to pay for me to go into a care home, and then I'm sitting on a great big house. It's just, so actually and also having my own money when I do need to move into a care home means I'll have more choice. So it's not all bad.
I think it's really interesting having this conversation with someone who's within the sector and knows the sector and also knows the finances of the sector. And I have a personal morality sort of conflict here between the fact that we have an NHS which I support, and it would be nice if there was more parity between social care and the NHS. That's a different conversation. But we have care free at the point of need. However, the disease that most people die with in this country, I think it's something like 12% of all deaths, is dementia or Alzheimer's. Cancer, if aggregated, is more, but they split it out and what have you. So I think 60,000 people died in 2024 with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's dementia, and it's yet not paid for by the NHS, whereas everything below that on the list is. So I have this moral dilemma that I feel there's a conflict there. On the other hand of it, and listening to you then talking about Dilnot, completely agree that if you actually did implement Dilnot proposals and that social care was free at the point of need, the finances don't work, and you have this tension between those who have houses passing, and you have this sort of inequality gap that builds up within society of saying, well, these houses go to the children and they benefit from that and their family benefits from that, but those who weren't going to benefit didn't benefit anyway, and I can't square that circle. Do you think that that's part of the reform, or do you think that actually we should leave the sector, this presumption within the sector that if you have the assets, if you have the money, you should pay for it yourself?
So there's quite a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, I know you didn't mean to say this, but Dilnot didn't say free at the point of delivery social care. He said you pay for your own care until you've paid something like 76,000 towards your care costs. Then the local authority steps in and picks up the cost. However, the 76,000 is only for the care bit, And there was a big argument. There was already a bun fight emerging about how much the care bit was. 330 a week for the care bit. All of the rest of it is so-called hotel costs. So then you have to, and also anything you've paid towards home care before you moved into a care home counts towards what you've paid. So there'd have to be a very complicated calculation to work out how much you'd paid just for the care bit before you hit 72,000. And that's why it would take years and years and years and years, because you have to divide 72,000 by something like 330 a week, even though your care's actually costing 1,000 or 1,200 a week, actually, because of all the so-called hotel costs. So it was so complicated that it really had, that's why A, it didn't help that many people, and B, it had the opportunity to create a much more divisive and adversarial system of like, well, yeah, I was paying for home care. No, you weren't. Yes, I was. How much was that? You know, you can imagine all of that. So it wasn't an easy solution. But the other thing I'd say is when you're talking about people living with dementia, and yeah, dementia, oh my God, is that unfair? Getting dementia is so unfair. But the real question we should be asking is, why aren't we supporting people living with dementia better? If the NHS was responsible for people living with dementia, they wouldn't give money for you to buy a care home place. They'd stick you in a ward somewhere, in a geriatric hospital where, I mean, that's what happens now with people living with dementia that are under the care of the NHS, because we don't love people living with dementia. We don't love them. We don't do enough research into the condition. We don't do enough to help people when they've got it. We don't do enough to prevent it, and we don't really, you know, examine their care. And so I would proceed with extreme caution, because I think if you made the NHS responsible for people living with dementia, they wouldn't start buying lovely care home places for them. They'd be putting them back in geriatric hospitals again.
So it's really interesting hearing you talking about that. My current soapbox, inspired by my son's GCSE history, bizarrely, is going through from the 1600s and the poor laws then, which are the first codification of social care in this country. And it's fascinating. You hear echoes of it, and this concept of, you know, of the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, and that you
Yeah.
have, you know, there's a then you've got the reform of those in the 1840s through the Victorians, and this moral concept of care is your own responsibility. And yet, you're saying that if we went to the NHS, we'd actually almost be back in the, and I dread to use the term, the workhouse conditions of that sort of 1840s, where social care was seen as something that it was meant, in certain instances, it was meant to be worse than if you worked and if you did it yourself. It was meant to be something that you
Oh,
didn't
to
want
put
to
you
do.
off. To put you off. Yeah.
Exactly. And yet,
Yeah.
I think you're saying that actually dementia, which is luck, we think, or chance that you get it, and certainly it's unfair if you get it, then actually there might be a situation where the NHS would say, well, okay, just due to chance, you're in this worse position than you would be if you could afford it yourself or if you could pay for it yourself. Which, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry, I'm waffling about conflicts that aren't there, but it is fascinating just hearing what you're saying and tracking this through the history books as well.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, going back to what I was saying about the legislation, the National the Welfare and Assistance Act, I've got it the wrong way around, but you know what I mean. Back in 45 or 46, it was the welfare state as it was set up at the same time as the NHS, but nobody really cares. But anyway, that was based on that poor law principle that if you fell below a certain level and you were really destitute, you would get something. Obviously, in the past, that was based on like church groups or villages, but then it was sort of systematized under the Victorians. But yeah, the idea was to put people off, and I still think that that we do that now. That this like we blame the poor for their situation, and we often lock them up. So if you look at the prison population, as a high proportion of care leavers, a high proportion of people with dyslexia, even learning disability, mental health needs, you know, we sort of lock them up. And the thing with the NHS and dementia is, and I don't want to do a disservice to my colleagues in the NHS, but they do practice a curative model.
Mm.
The care is institutionalized, and they've got a lot of people in the queue, so they can't spend that much time or money on any one person, and it is the medical model because they're there to fix people and get them home again. And so dementia doesn't really fit. It doesn't fit that because you can't cure it. You can't send people home again after you've given them a tablet or mended their broken bones or perhaps treated their cancer. And also, we are, in my view, a very ageist society where we allow ageism to pervade a lot of our thinking. It's very rarely challenged. It's not challenged in the way that other forms of discrimination are challenged. And so we don't see old people. We don't. And that a lot of our problems, I think, do stem from that. We don't revere our older people or cherish them and look after them in the ways that some other societies do. We make jokes about them peeing themselves and living in smelly care homes and falling over, and we think that's funny. And the other complication with dementia, of course, is fear. It's very sad, and it speaks to bereavement and loss. Loss of that person as they were, and loss of future, and it's scary. So we don't grip it in the way that I think we should. And my worry about the NHS, just going back to what they would do, is they would like commissioners, they'd go for the most cost-effective option.
Yeah. The only metaphor I've got for how the NHS works compared to social care is that the NHS is essentially quick fit. You've got a designated problem, you go in, and they are really, really good at getting you in, out, fit as quickly as possible. Whereas social care is the garage you go to for your services and your MOTs and your regular checkups, and it's so much more involved and longer term. And we have in our care homes, we have 16 parts to our care plan. I think the average NHS care plan has 5 sections, and it's that level of mentality where you can talk to the NHS about, well, what's your purpose? Well, our purpose is to make people better and get them out of our hospitals as quickly as possible. Social care, what's your purpose? Well, older person social care. Our purpose is really to give people a good death. Ultimately, you're coming. I mean, there's life in the last 2 years, on average, in care homes 2 years, but we know that those 2 years and that death are so valuable that we have to invest our mentality in saying, if this is all you've got left, every meal's got to be great. Those Christmases are hyper important, and those final weeks, days, hours, we've got to get them right every single time because that's what we value. You're absolutely right. I don't think the NHS. Well, the NHS can't have that concept because our what we're both aiming for is completely different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. And I mean, there are more facets to that in terms of well-being, like housing and community and getting around, being able to walk and gritting pavements so you don't fall over. It's much more about community. But I agree that care homes are largely taking that end of life piece for people and helping them be peaceful and happy at end of life. And I've seen some really brilliant care, and one little story is, I mean, obviously I've had the privilege of running care homes, and oh my God, it was hard work. It was hard work, but I took a job working in a care home kitchen in a care home down the road from me. I don't know what possessed me. I just thought it was a really good, at the time I thought, I like cooking and I like old people. I just saw this job it was like almost in the pay. Anyway, I went and worked there for 8 weeks, and I did the afternoon shift because there's no way I was going to cook for like 40 people. But I did. So the chef came in at lunchtime, and he or she did all of like the main meals and everything. And then in the evening it was like supper, and I did 4 till 8, often at the weekend. and I made sandwiches and salads, and I served up food the chef had made, and I did, everything, and we had these dreaded things called the trays. You know, the trays where people eat in their rooms, and you've got to get the food right and the hot, and everybody's got individual preferences, and some people like soup and some people don't, and oh my God, the trays. Anyway, blah blah. Why am I telling you this? Oh yeah, but what I saw, they had no idea who I wasn't anyone. They couldn't care less who I was. I just turned up to do the cooking. In fact, they were going, "Oh, why don't you come be a carer?" I'm like, "Well, mate." They'd had no idea who I was. I was just there to do the cooking. And what I observed is there were no managers on duty because it was evening. There were no team leaders. There were no families, particularly. Occasionally they might visit. There were no cameras. The interactions that I observed between the care workers and the people that lived there were so loving and respectful. And it was around what you're saying about like food, make every experience as good as it can be, but nobody was watching them. They weren't doing it because their manager was around or they were going to get into trouble or whatever. And consistently for 8 weeks, when I went in there 4 or 5 times a week, I can't remember now, I saw all of these really respectful and loving interactions, and it really made me so happy and proud and hopeful about working in the care sector.
So, other soapbox, got to. What you've just said is fascinating, and it's warming, and it's great to hear that the sector is doing that right. I think that social care is often seen as a minority sector, that only a small part of our society will ever interface with it. Oh, we have 400,000 beds. Clearly, that's not every old person over 65 will end up in a care home. Not every older person will require at-home care. Not everyone will be a child who requires care and therefore a care leaver. But actually, I think if you add us all together, we are a majority service. The majority of people, either through family members or employment, or you are actually accessing the service yourself, or you're employed by the sector, will actually engage with social care at some point in our lives. And the ethics and values and morals that you've just described of the team doing what we naturally do, I think is something that we don't actually have in the majority of our lives. I live near Ringwood, which has a very old population. We're just north of Christchurch on the south coast. So lots of old people at lunchtime when I walk around town, and I don't see that level of care towards the elder people in our community. From everyone else, it's we don't take the time. We don't respect our elders as you suggested. So I'd suggest that going back to the point about reform, I think it's if we can get those values in our society, maybe that because care is seen as more of a majority service and not this minority thing that happens in certain locations. Maybe that's the way that we start to get more care happening in our community.
Well, you're not going to change the perception of care, and you're not going to change the perception of cared for people, because we don't want to be the cared for person, because it involves a lot of fear and loss. And so you've either got a disability or you're getting old or whatever, and we have these negative connotations that are based on guilt and fear. Mm-hmm. And care itself is women's work, and a lot of women do it for free. So why would you pay carers to do something that a lot of women are already doing for free? So, and then you've got the fact that even though it touches a lot of people's lives, politically it is still a minority sport, and politicians will say, my postbag is not filled up with letters from old people. There's just not. There's no votes in it. So those are all the sort of structural reasons. And like I said about the ageism and the jokes and everything, these are the sort of structural reasons why a lot of them historic, like we were talking about it bleeding in from the past, weren't we, about the poor people and prisons and all the rest of it, why it's not going to change. However, it is changing, and there's been a lot of change. And actually, care has improved over the years, and some of it is through rights groups, like look at Valuing People for people with a learning disability, still a seminal paper now saying, I want to lead a normal life, an ordinary life. We got rid of the institutions, we got rid of the hostels, we went to small group living. And same with young people. I know it's very a lot of debate around special educational needs at the moment, but a lot of that is rights based. And older people's care homes have improved hugely. You can expect an ensuite now. You can expect to have a menu and choose what you're going to have to eat. You know, you can expect to have your medical needs looked after as well as your social needs. And I think, as just thinking about older people's care, as baby boomers, which is probably our, I don't know how old you are, but might be our generation, as we've got much more of an assertive and rights based. We no longer revere the GP, do we, or the priest, you know, and people are more articulate actually and more individual about what they want. I don't mean that in a negative way, but they're more assertive about saying, well, actually, this is what I expect and this is what I want, and we've got better transparency and stuff. So I started off with like a negative. You're not going to change people's thinking overnight because we've got heritage. However, as we move forward, people are going to be more articulate about what they want and expect, and those caring for them are going to have to step up.
And the MPs' postbags will start to get more full with baby boomers saying, "This is what I expect. This is not what I'm getting."
Potentially, I mean, our politics is so broken at the moment. It's like our politics is like a sort of comedy, like it's the gift that keeps on giving, if you like comedy. I don't know, I can't take politicians seriously right now, but sorry, I was like, no, I mean, not that I don't have respect for them. I mean, look to your local authority is what I would say. My advice is forget your MP and engage with your local authority and your local council, because well, they're going to become unitaries now, aren't they? We're going to have one council probably in each area, but local councillors, they really do care actually. And they want what's best for their local area, and they want to be voted in again. And that connection between democracy and, you know, having worked in local authority for 20 years, that connection between who you vote for and what you get is much closer at local authority level. So I'd say engage with your councillors or become a councillor.
That's an amazing shout. Okay.
Can I tell you about my care home voting campaign? Did I ever told you about that? You know?
Go on. No, yeah, this hasn't been mentioned. Go on.
I did it years ago, but it's carried on. When I was working at the Orders of St John Care Trust, it was the election, 2015 election, and I said we should encourage the people living in our care homes to vote because it's a really good way of engaging with politicians. Good publicity, you get the candidates into the care homes, speaking to the old people. They have to articulate, you know, they themselves will learn about social care and care homes and what's going on. People will be respected as citizens. It'll also get the care workers more engaged in their own rights. So we ran this campaign. I won't go into the detail, you can read about it, but we ran this campaign. And in the end, about something like 35% of the people living in our care homes voted in the election. We had local radio programs, we had newspapers, we had candidates. We went out on polling day and actually took photos of people voting. It was a really, really positive campaign, which we then carried on for the referendum and other things. But one of the things that came out of it, this is just a small side effect, is later on I was out and about and I bumped into, we had a number of care homes. I bumped into somebody and she said, I never voted before. She said, but now I'm a parish councillor off the back of that campaign. And I'm like, yeah, that's one of the positive effects that we were looking for.
Again, a great example of the difference between social care and healthcare is that we're not just focused on one outcome. There is so much more in social care that that we try and do. I'm 35%. I think this is, I'm going to go and dive into the detail there. Was that individuals living in the care homes, or did that include team members as well?
No, that's people living in the care homes, but there was variation. So one of the care homes in Lincolnshire, 85% of the residents voted.
Wow.
Yeah. The 35% was across the piece. And it brings up the thing about dementia and people living with dementia, because I do speak about this campaign from time to time if anybody asks me. And um, you know what I say to people in the audience, I say, so when you think about who you're going to vote for in the election, like what comes to mind? I say, don't tell me, just think about it. And then I say, you can vote based on anything you like. You don't have to tell anyone. And when you go into that booth, you have total privacy. You've got a screen, haven't you? Because the whole idea is you don't have to tell anyone who you voted for. And you can vote for someone based on their hairstyle. And nobody's going to challenge you because it is entirely up to you. And with voting, there is no exclusion for people living with dementia or mental capacity or anything. You cannot stop people from voting. It is their right. The only people that aren't allowed to vote are convicted prisoners, not those on reform, convicted prisoners, the House of Lords, and they're all family. So like they're the only people that aren't allowed to vote. But if you're living with dementia, you want to go and vote, you can. And I just think again it speaks to thinking about people as citizens, you know, with rights to be respected and listened to. I mean, we had lots of fun in the care homes, like doing things like, you know, we had reminiscence boards up and talked about elections, days gone by, and we had voting champions. We made sure everybody was registered. You know, some people chose postal votes, but most people went in person. So you don't just say, oh, there's an election on Saturday. Do you want, it'll be Thursday, won't it? It's an election on Thursday. Let's go and vote. We did a lot of work to actually generate interest in the election and make sure people were registered. And that, I'm sorry, I can't remember what you asked me, but yeah, anyway, the 35% was across the piece, across all of the homes. And we had, at the time, we had about 70 care homes at the time.
Yeah. Wow. It is remarkable to hear that and go, okay, well, actually, that's what social care can do. Because I think getting people to vote is hard enough, but also getting through the concept of you can leave this care home and you can interact with your community, and then getting the community in is even harder. And that's an amazing piece of work there.
Well, what I didn't achieve, but what I've seen other care homes do now, actually, and it goes back to the one that I visited in Swindon, although whenever I get an opportunity to go into a care home, I always take it. So if you want to invite me, I'll be there on the doorstep. But is they'd given over their care home as a polling station, which is another very brilliant idea because it gets people in as well. So you've got because you want that interaction with your community, don't you? You want people to know you're there. And also you want people to come and move in and live with you as well. You want to be viable. So, but you're also giving back to the community by giving over that space as a polling station or sometimes space for other uses for the community, you know, for people to come in and out, because not everybody can get out of a care home very easily. So we want to get people in as well, don't we?
Exactly. Previous podcast spoke to Julie Burton about what she's doing at Twin Globe, and they actively promote their care home as a social space within the community. You know, they have plates and what have you. And it is remarkable what can be done if you just put a little bit of effort behind it and get the community in. Aware of time, but I wanted to end with a couple of thoughts for people listening. We spoke a lot earlier about the rights that individuals have through the local authority. What can people do to make sure that they know their rights and make sure that they're being heard?
That's quite difficult because, I mean, the first thing I'd say is vote. Always vote. It's quite difficult because the reality is that despite, as we were saying earlier, social care does touch a lot of people's lives. You actually really only get interested in it when it's touching your life. And the risk is, I mean, I've done work trying to get people to plan ahead over the years, done work with Age UK, for example, focus groups, you know, trying to get people to plan ahead. And people find it very, very difficult to imagine that they'll ever need care, even if they've got somebody in their family that needs care. It's the human condition. We have this optimism bias. where it's not going to happen to us, we're not going to have a car accident, we're not going to have blah, 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 so yeah, optimism. So people go along like this, they go like, oh no, I'm not going to get old, I'm not going to get old, and then they go like, oh, I'm old. And they're like, and all the services are like a bit confusing and not very good, and it's like too late to influence by the time you're at the point of needing care. However, to get people to get engaged before that point is, I don't know what you do in the evening, but I don't spend it looking at my rights, just in case something happens. However, if I get a parking ticket, I will be looking at my rights like pretty fast. So what I would say, and what we do need more of, and it was in the most recent Care Act, 2015 Care Act, is better information and advice. So at the point where you do need care, or one of your relatives need care or might need care, there's good information and advice available, and it does actually exist. Don't feel it's all like too confusing. So Age UK produce good information, citizens advice, your local authority will have advice. You might want to even get a lawyer involved, if you're really concerned, or if your finances are complicated. There are legal people that specialise in older people's services and financial situation. And the other thing is to ask other people, like word of mouth is really, really important. Ask other people. I mean, you haven't asked me about finding care specifically, or ask a carer. If you're looking for a carer, ask a carer. If you're looking for care, ask somebody who's receiving care. That they are the best people to tell you what's around and what might be good. I didn't answer your question very well then, did I? But
it's fine. I'll also throw in, by the way, for the technical nerds out there, Annex A of the Guidance of the Care Act, which relates to how fees are set and choice. One of the best written government documents I've ever read.
Yeah.
A very, very good piece of document.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a lot of emphasis there on Age UK, care concern, local authorities? So public sector government, local authorities, and then the third sector, charities. Ultimately, the local authorities are trying to do two things. They're trying to promote choice. They're trying to follow their legal responsibilities under the Care Act. On the other hand, they've got to protect their budgets and avoid Section 114 notice going in saying, well, essentially, we can't deliver our statutory services. This year, more than ever, and I think you're going to see more local authorities getting close to the Section 114s, if not already issuing them. Certainly, a number of local authorities that we work with have already said in their budgets and their pre-budget this year, yeah, we're really close and we're really concerned. What do you think people should do do you think it changes anything if the local authority is under financial pressure? Should it, or where do you think their responsibilities lie, Care Act or financial stability?
Okay, so if you look at the number of local authorities that have actually gone bust and issued Section 114 notices, there's a tiny handful, very small number, and a lot of them made poor decisions related to things like property and capital spend. So they either changed offices, bought buildings, or entered commercial leases, tried to make money out of stuff, which basically, with respect to them, they didn't have the commercial expertise to do. So a lot of the ones that went bust had actually shown, in my opinion, poor judgment around things that were not directly related to social care. And if you look at the pressure on adult social care budgets and children's budgets, that's not what is tipping them into insolvency, or it wasn't anyway. It was these other decisions. Now what's happening is it's actually children's placements that is putting a lot of pressure on the budget. So it's both children's placements, but also special educational needs and transport, home to school transport. The government has said that they're going to take away responsibility for the spend. So they are actually lifting all of that overspend and taking it centrally. and it is billions. If you actually look what's happening, it's a lot of money, but it is to prevent the local authorities from going bust. And there's something technical happening this year, which I don't know if it's something to do with the spending review or something. I didn't look it up before I came onto the podcast, but there's some deadline this year, which means they need to do it. So that's going to be effectively taken care of. If you're a child with special educational needs or a parent, you may not see it like that. You're going to be thinking, whoa, what's going on? But just talking about it in big picture financial terms, local authorities aren't allowed to go bust. They're never going to actually go bust because the government will bail them out. However, they are under pressure. The only thing that I would say is, having worked in a local authority for 20 years, every year we'd go, oh, we haven't got enough money. Oh, we need to make some cuts. Oh, we've got the Gershon savings to make. Oh, we've got to do this. We did it. With that mantra has been going on for years and years and years and years. Local authorities are very good at doing things differently and finding efficiency savings. And they are now saying, actually, we're getting to the point where we've run out of good ideas of, how to make things more efficient. And then the last thing to say on that is, because of the devolution and the changes in the way that local authorities operate, structural changes, so we're going to have fewer local authorities, the combination of budgets, there's going to be some councils that had no responsibility for social care before, and suddenly they're going to find, whoa, all of this money is going on, and citizens are going to say, hang on a minute, I'm paying my council tax, I want to see more for it than just social care. What about the environment and all of the other things that are going on? So I think politically, devolution and the restructuring and social care is going to become perhaps more a topic of conversation. But at the end of the day, these are statutory responsibilities, and they've always found a way of funding them one way and another, whether it's increasing council tax above the 5% cap, or bailouts from the government, them taking off overspends or whatever. As long as it's in statute that people are entitled to care, then the government, by whatever mechanism, has to meet it.
That's a really powerful point to leave this on. That there is an entitlement to care, and everyone has that, which is, you actually stop and think about it, that's actually a really great place to be. Sarah, it has been lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. If people wanted to get in touch with you and find out more about what you do and to pick your brains on this topic, where can they reach you?
So I'm active on LinkedIn. That's the most obvious place. If you're not on LinkedIn, you can email me, but I've got a very long and complicated email address. Will you put it on where are you putting the podcast? Can you put it on the notes for the podcast?
We'll put it in the description of the podcast. It goes onto YouTube. It goes onto Spotify as well.
Yeah, so I'm always happy to talk to anybody. Just don't do a pile-on in terms of all of the things that I've said to upset all the small care home owners.
I'm sure we won't.
Yeah, don't do a pile-on.
Sarah, thank you so much for your time. We'll leave it there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Bye.